Ed Sullivan sat in his office at Studio 50, looking at the name on the booking sheet with visible irritation. Joan Rivers, a female comedian. His talent coordinator had been pushing for this booking for weeks, and Ed had finally reluctantly agreed to give her a shot. But not a real shot. 90 seconds. That's all. A throwaway spot at 10:45 p.m., when half the audience would have already turned off their televisions. It was February 17, 1967, and Ed Sullivan had very clear ideas about what women could do on his show. They could sing. They could dance. They could stand next to their husbands and look pretty. But comedy, real comedy, that was a man's job. Ed had said it to his producer just that morning. Women aren't funny. They can get laughs by being cute or self-deprecating. But they can't kill the way men can. It's just biology. His producer had tried to argue. Joan Rivers is different. She's smart, she's sharp, she writes her own material. But Ed had waved him off. 90 seconds. That's it. And if she bombs, which she will, we never book another female comedian again. What Ed didn't know was that Joan Rivers had been fighting her entire life for those 90 seconds, and she was about to use them to blow up every assumption Ed Sullivan had about what women could do. Before we dive into this incredible story, hit that subscribe button, because what you're about to witness is the moment when one woman took 90 seconds that were meant to bury her and turned them into a career that changed comedy forever. To understand what Joan Rivers was up against in 1967, you need to understand what it meant to be a woman trying to do stand-up comedy in an industry built by and for men. There were no female comedians on television, not real ones. Lucille Ball was beloved, but she played a character. Phyllis Diller had broken through, but she did it by making herself the joke, by being self-deprecating about her looks and her marriage. The message was clear. Women could be funny if they made themselves the target. Joan Rivers had been trying to make it as a comedian for almost a decade. She'd grown up in Brooklyn as Joan Malinsky, the daughter of Russian Jewish immigrants who wanted her to marry well and live a quiet, respectable life. Instead, Joan had moved to Greenwich Village, changed her name, and started performing in coffee houses for almost no money, facing audiences who didn't think women belonged on comedy stages. The rejection had been constant and brutal. Club owners told her directly, "Women aren't funny. Go home." Bookers laughed at her when she asked for spots. Other comedians, all male, treated her like a curiosity at best and an annoyance at worst. Joan had been told 1,000 times that she should give up, that she was wasting her time, that biology determined who could be funny and who couldn't. But Joan had something that most people didn't recognize at first. She had rage. Not the kind of rage that made you scream or break things. The quiet kind. The kind that came from being told your whole life that you weren't allowed to want what you wanted, that your dreams were inappropriate for your gender, that you should be grateful for whatever scraps men decided to throw you. Oh, and Joan had turned that rage into comedy. Her material wasn't self-deprecating. It was angry and honest and sharp. She talked about the absurdity of being a woman in a world run by men. She talked about sex and marriage and ambition in ways that made audiences uncomfortable because they recognized the truth in what she was saying. By early 1967, Joan had built a small following in New York. She was playing better clubs, getting longer sets. And then Ed Sullivan's talent coordinator had seen her at the Bitter End, a comedy club in Greenwich Village. He'd been impressed enough to suggest booking her. But when he brought it to Ed, the response had been immediate and dismissive. "A female comedian? On my show? Absolutely not." The coordinator had pushed. "Ed, she's got something. The audience was eating out of her hand. She could surprise you." Ed had been adamant. "Women aren't built for comedy. It's not sexism. It's just reality. But fine. Give her 90 seconds at the end of the show. When she bombs, we'll prove the point and move on." Now 6 hours before showtime, Joan Rivers sat in a dressing room at Studio 50, her hands shaking as she looked at her notes. 90 seconds. She'd been given 90 seconds to prove that her entire gender could be funny. The weight of it was crushing. There was a knock at the door. It was Ed Sullivan's assistant. "Miss Rivers, Mr. Sullivan would like to see you in his office." Joan felt her stomach drop. Was he canceling her? Had he changed his mind? She followed the assistant down the hallway to Ed's office. Ed was sitting at his desk, looking at papers. He didn't look up when Joan entered. "Miss Rivers," Ed said, still not looking at her. "I want to be clear about your spot tonight. 90 seconds, no more. You're on at 10:45, which means most of my audience will have already gone to bed. This is not prime placement. This is a test." "I understand, Mr. Sullivan," Joan said, trying to keep her voice steady. Ed finally looked up at her. Do you understand that if you fail tonight, you're not just failing for yourself, you're failing for every woman who thinks she can do comedy. The industry will use you as proof that women can't handle stand-up. That's the position you're in." Joan felt anger flare. "With respect, Mr. Sullivan, that's not the position I'm in. That's the position you've put me in. You're not giving me 90 seconds because you believe in me. You're giving me 90 seconds because you want me to fail so you can feel justified in never booking another woman." Ed's face hardened. "I'm giving you 90 seconds because that's all you've earned. If you were as good as you think you are, you'd have more to show for it." "I would have more to show for it," Joan said, her voice rising despite herself. "If the industry wasn't designed to keep women out, I'm as funny as any male comedian you've had on this show. The only difference is that when men bomb, it's their individual failure. When I bomb, it's proof that all women are failures." Ed stood up. "You've got 90 seconds tonight, Miss Rivers. Use them however you want. But don't blame me when you don't get the response you're hoping for." Joan walked out of Ed's office, her whole body trembling, not with fear, with fury. Ed Sullivan wanted her to fail. He was rooting for it. And that made her more determined than ever to succeed. At 10:43 p.m., Joan Rivers stood in the wings waiting for her cue. The show had been running long. Ed was wrapping up the previous segment, looking tired. The studio audience was starting to file out. This was the worst possible spot, the graveyard slot where acts went to die. Ed walked to his mark and introduced Joan with obvious disinterest. "Ladies and gentlemen, a young comedian from New York, Miss Joan Rivers." Joan walked onto that stage, and she could feel the audience's second skepticism. A woman? Doing comedy? At this hour, most of them were already reaching for their coats. Joan grabbed the microphone and made a split-second decision. She threw out her prepared material, the safe jokes she'd planned to use. Instead, she went straight for the truth. "I know what you're thinking," Joan said. "A female comedian. At 10:45 on a Sunday night. Ed Sullivan is hoping you've all gone to bed so nobody witnesses this disaster." A few people laughed, surprised. "And I know why I'm on so late. Because Ed Sullivan doesn't think women are funny. He told me that himself this afternoon. He said women aren't built for comedy." The audience was paying attention now. This wasn't what they expected. "And you know what?" Joan continued. "He's right. Women aren't built for comedy. We're built for something much harder. We're built to smile while men tell us we're not qualified. We're built to laugh at jokes that aren't funny, because the man telling them expects it. We're built to make ourselves smaller so men can feel bigger." The laughter was building now. Real laughter, not polite chuckles. "I went to college," Joan said. "Barnard. You know what my mother said when I told her I wanted to be a comedian?" She said, "Joan, why can't you just marry a doctor like a normal girl?" And I said, "Mother, I don't want to marry a doctor. I want to be funnier than doctors." She's still in therapy. The audience was laughing hard now. Joan could feel it. The shift in energy, the moment when skepticism turned to engagement. "Ed Sullivan gave me 90 seconds tonight," Joan said, looking directly at the camera. 90 seconds to prove that women can be funny. "And you want to know the truth? I could do it in 30, but I'm going to use all 90 just to piss him off." The studio erupted. Not polite applause. Real laughter, the kind that comes from recognizing truth wrapped in humor. Joan kept going, talking about dating, about sex, about the absurdity of being a woman in a world that wanted you to be decorative, but not challenging, pretty but not sexual, present but not heard. And every word was sharp, honest, and devastatingly funny. When her 90 seconds ended, the audience was on its feet. Not all of them, but enough. Ed Sullivan stood in the wings, his face unreadable. Joan walked off stage, her heart pounding, and Ed was waiting. "That wasn't the material you rehearsed," Ed said. "No sir, it wasn't," Joan said. "You attacked me on my own show," Ed said. "Yes sir, I did." Ed looked at Joan Rivers for a long moment. Then something unexpected happened. He smiled. Not a big smile, but real. "That took guts. Stupid guts. But guts." "My office." Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., Joan left the studio that night not knowing if she'd just ended her career or started it. The next morning, she showed up at Ed's office at exactly 9 a.m. Ed was already there, drinking coffee. "Sit down, Miss Rivers," Ed said. Joan sat, prepared for the worst. "I was wrong about you," Ed said simply. "Not about women in general. I still think most women aren't funny, but you are. You're as funny as any male comedian I've had on this show. Maybe funnier, because you've got something to say that needs saying." Joan didn't know what to say. "You're invited back," Ed continued. "Regular booking, not 90 seconds, full segment, prime time, and you can do whatever material you want. I won't interfere." Joan felt tears starting. "Mr. Sullivan, why? Why are you doing this?" Ed was quiet for a moment. "Because you made me laugh, really laugh, and because you were right about what you said on stage. I was hoping you'd fail. I was using you to prove a point, and instead you proved a different point. You proved that talent doesn't have a gender. It just has to be honest and brave." Joan Rivers appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show 20 times after that first 90-second spot. Each time she pushed boundaries further, talked about things that had never been discussed on television, made audiences laugh while making them uncomfortable. And each appearance, more female comedians started getting booked, started believing it was possible. In 1986, Joan became the first woman to host a late-night talk show. When reporters asked her about breaking that barrier, she always went back to Ed Sullivan. "Ed gave me 90 seconds that were supposed to bury me, and I used them to prove that being underestimated is the greatest gift you can get, because nobody sees you coming." Ed Sullivan died in 1974, but before he did, he gave one final interview, where he was asked about his biggest regrets. "I regret that it took a woman with 90 seconds to teach me something I should have known all along. That funny is funny, regardless of who's delivering it. Joan Rivers didn't just prove me wrong. She proved that my assumptions were keeping great talent off my show, and that's unforgivable." The story of Ed Sullivan and Joan Rivers is about what happens when someone takes the smallest opportunity they're given and refuses to be diminished by it. Ed gave Joan 90 seconds in a throwaway spot, expecting her to confirm his prejudices. Instead, she used them to blow up every assumption he had. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. Joan Rivers walked onto that stage knowing that 90 seconds could end her career, and she chose to use them to tell the truth anyway. Have you ever been given a tiny opportunity that was meant to prove you'd fail and turned it into something bigger? Share your story in the comments below.